Myself and David had been in bands years ago, many years ago. And after I'd moved to America, we'd talk and we'd, email and that kind of stuff. And music was always the bond that held us together. When we first started writing songs, the idea of writing about Bailieborough, which is where we grew up, which is the town that we're writing about mainly, it's the town that we're focusing on. We were sort of both struck by the fact that life in rural Ireland back in the day was so unique and so different and so odd and interesting. I found myself delving into ancestry and the past and putting value on things that sort of I may have taken for granted in my time. We find ourselves now embarking on what we call a mini Irish tour, and it felt important to us to play in Bailieborough. And there's a number of reasons for that, and for me there's some very personal reasons.
Thursday, tomorrow's roll. Shawadi wadi, legs and coal. Potato and spangles. Cola. The Calvin kind. Sticks to the glass like porter. The wine it turns into water. The finest of porter flows from taps and crossings of the lemon tree over the border. There's cheap cans and cheap tape recorders, clean farms of boys taking orders, a terrified young corporal from Macclesfield, a sons that are daughters, turbulent daughters, wrapped up in blankets, pace the floors, and shits knitted cells. Later when the laughter stops and the darkness descends, he punches holes in walls and roars like a bull. And then he cries for dead fathers and lost love that withered and died on the vine for want of a drop of rain or a ray of sun. That night she found him in the landing on the stool, the rope around his neck and him shaking and crying, his face pale. He was a child again. She took him down and he was ghosted out past the hideout, through Coo Hill, to Rockcurry, to Monaghan, where the Swan Lake speaks to no man. Thursday, tomorrow's world. Shawadi wadi, legs and coal. Potato and spangles. Cola, the common kind. Sticks to the glass like water. The wine it turns into water. The fine is the porter, the walls from taps, the crossings and the lemon tree, pissing in the shallow pool, where seminary boys spend Saturdays, pissing in the shallow pool, seminary boys spend Saturdays.
I moved to Bailieborough when I was 11 years old, and we'd lived in a suburb of Dublin. And my family had moved down. We'd sort of hit hard times, and my father had grown up in Bailieborough, and in fact his father had owned a bar in Bailieborough, and we ended up purchasing the bar. We sold our house in Dublin and we purchased this bar in Bailieborough.
Pretty sure that's the house he was born in.
I really resented moving to Bailieborough and resented the lifestyle, and it was a different time. While it was only 50 miles away from Dublin, it might as well have been a million miles because it was before cell phones and computers and all of that kind of stuff.
I moved back to Baleaborough at the beginning of 1976, and I have to say for my family, and indeed particularly for me, it was a really happy experience because we, as a living in an Irish family in England, there was always a sense that there was a part of you perhaps belonged somewhere else.
This shop here, Motor Factors, was Frank McDonald, the guy who gave us penny bars and Major.
I had quite a pronounced Cockney accent at that time, which really made you stick out, and you had to kind of work with that. But I mean, I think from a personal perspective, a lot of the time that kind of made you actually go for things. There was no point trying to cower in the corner and sort of hide yourself. I did sound a bit different from some of the other kids, and I guess that kind of made me sort of almost a bit kind of cocky in a way, and sort of a little bit more sort of outspoken. I think it was probably about 4 or 5 months after me. Justin arrived from Dublin, and that was kind of interesting. It was a little bit different than some of the other kids arriving, because I think he was seen as in some way being a little bit more sophisticated than perhaps some of us. So I think a lot of the kids of the class kind of looked up to him.
I did take part fully in sort of the life in Baleaborough and what young boys of my age would have been doing at the time. But I would have to say, yes, there was an outsider view, because when you're looking at something from the outside, where you're not, if you're part of something and you're comfortable within your milieu and you're ingrained within your milieu, you don't really question it. You don't really see what's going on. So it's only when something changes that it sort of strikes you as that's a bit unusual, or that's a little different. So I would say that's a big part of why I felt it was important to document this. Thanks for coming out today. We're the Sons of Southern Ulster. 3 of us are from Baleaborough, and we've got Paddy here from Donegal. And I should point out that yesterday when Paddy showed up at 3 o'clock, he lives in Australia now. It was the first time that the 4 of us had gotten together in over 30 years.
Hi. Hey, how are you? Hold on, just step outside here. We're in the middle of the noisy garage. Whereabouts are you? Hello? Oh, Jason. No, I'll come downstairs. There. Yeah, whereabouts in Scarra for you?
So I presume he means in here.
Would have to be, wouldn't it?
But he's probably in some shit car, right? Maybe a hired car.
There he is there, the 171D, I'd say.
Swing around.
That's him, eh? There he goes.
How you doing? Jesus. Time no see, man. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Drive okay?
Oh.
Tiring, yeah?
Yeah, Elwoman.
Look great.
Paddy, how you doing? Good to see you. That was 30 years, huh?
Yes.
I think, good lad yourself.
Yeah.
How you getting on?
Good to see you, man.
Long time no see.
Yeah. Fucking hell.
We need you badly.
Come on.
Right, let's go get plugged in.
Oh, jeez, we're ready. We've already been practicing.
Good.
That's the old original case, isn't it?
The original
We've
case.
had the base for 35 years. Yep.
Obviously been in the attic for a good while.
You've made the right decision. Wrapped in bubble wrap. Right, here, we go back.
This is a little thing we put together. It's called I Live in the Past. I think we're going to embrace our age and our time. So, 2000. They say I live in the past. I can make the future, like Lundy, like Kathmandu, but I choose not to. But what does the future hold? The fading papers, dodgy tickers, and buckets of regret. They say I live in the past, and they might be right. Someone has to remember, and so I dedicated myself not to that fucking sky pilot, but to history. That I'm proud to dwell there. Yellow of finger, black of lung. Strong thighs and plenty of them. Liver like a biblical calf. Fat in a warm beer and whiskey. Wine and baby sham. Any port in a storm. And watched as the light went from sunshine to darkness. Children on crisp and endless cabin cola. The treat long gone, as father declares, will stay for another one. Yes, I was there. I smelled the piss, I slipped in the vomit. I felt the pain of the punch and the sting of the put down.
fathers and I remember their fathers' names. I saw boys led astray by bad bastards and cowards. Genius blunted by indifference and ignorance. Opportunity squandered as opportunity knocks.
The Sons of Southern Ulster are, I suppose, primarily myself and Justin. You know, when we first started talking about doing something creatively again, we'd always been buddies. We stayed in contact, pretty close contact over the years, and would maybe, you know, meet up once or twice a year. You know, I would go over and we would go on a bit of a rip and have fun, and obviously we would always talk about music because that's one of the things that always pulled us together, but there was no sense that we were necessarily going to play music again together.
When we started to write songs, we sort of came up with a concept, and the concept was this Sons of Southern Ulster name of the band. And in one way it was sort of a joke, or it was a sort of a play on words, because you know, the Sons of Ulster, you hear that phrase all the time. And it was what we were trying to do there by calling the band the Sons of Southern Ulster, was to sort of give a nod to the three counties of Ulster that weren't part of what would be considered Northern Ireland. So there was sort of a playful notion, and we decided very consciously to sort of delve into this world that probably hasn't been examined as much as other parts of Ireland.
The actual start of the band in a functional way happened very soon after Justin's mother's funeral. So he came home, we were at the funeral. I think afterwards was the sense we wanted to get out of there and just get a bit of air. One thing leads to another. The next thing is we're picking up a few instruments, and you know, I guess really what happened was a pretty powerful thing, in that within minutes it was almost like the 20 years that had passed since we last played together just disappeared.
The reuniting of the band has been, it's a lot of fun, and it's very it's humbling in a way, because you sort of you go through life trying to grow and trying to learn new things and go down new avenues and be adventurous. And it's funny that 30 years after I sort of left these guys, who, you know, we were close friends, and we don't really see each other for 30 years, and then we come back full circle, and what we're valuing isn't that we're all sort of different and we're all what we really value is that we're all the same, and that we haven't really changed, we haven't really moved on, we're the same people. I'd like to think we're a little bit more mature, we're a little bit more self-reflective, probably a little less selfish, and I hope we're better people, but we are the same people.
Working with Paddy and Noel again has been really good fun. It's I think it's really helped to nail down the identity of the band. Moving to being a four-piece, you know, there's something which is real about that and authentic.
It's not a bad
For a first.
It's not bad.
Oh, you're expecting any improvements.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Next week will be a good shit.
So ready for this? It's coming together. Some of the songs, if we did them electrically or whatever, it's plugged in, they kind of lose the nuance. They become all rocky and kind of stupid. So I think we're still going to go with that half sort of kind of unplugged thing, and then rock out with a flat call. Drink is certainly a recurring element in the songs, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think we were in a small town of 2,000 people, and it had 30 pubs in the town. So drink was certainly a big piece, and for the better and for the worse. If you look at the path from boyhood to manhood, certainly in rural Ireland there were certain steps, and I suppose the first would be smoking cigarettes at that time, which was not particularly frowned upon. And then the next was drink, and then sex or girls or boys or whatever you were into. And I think most of us found the drink first. It's a very strong influence in when I look back on those times.
Lights down, banging on the walls at the farmer's hall. Cigarette, sweat, and an air of daring do. Hell's angels are out in force. They're looking over here, we're looking back, of course. And it won't be long now. On a feed and drink at the Chariot Inn, looking down the counter, not a man or a single
basically, the challenge with Foundry folk songs and for the songs in general really is to make sure there's enough space so that you can hear the vocals, you can hear the lyrics. There's a lot of spoken word, there's a lot of poetry, prose.
When you're singing about a small town in Cavan in the late 1970s or in the early 1980s, that material hasn't really been mined by conventional bands. So when you're looking for influences, when you're singing about that kind of stuff, you're also looking at people who aren't involved in music. And I think, you know, if we were to sort of say who influenced us, there would be that sort of poetry of Patrick Kavanagh and a lot of that sort of poetry that we did for the Leaving Cert that we didn't really appreciate at the time and then sort of came back to. And that certainly had an impact on the spoken word piece. Everybody sees the world from a local perspective. And as you get older, you realize that people's formative experiences, even though they might be in far-flung locations or they might have money or they might not have money, they're very similar. When I first moved to the United States, I thought it was this vast country and it was totally different and everyone had money and the world was your oyster. And the longer I'm there, I realised that America is no different than Ireland, and people have the same problems and the same outlook, and the local is still where people live. People don't really venture out of their localities. So I think it's natural that local and global have that relationship.
Macaronis, have we ever talked about that?
I can go. I know bits.
So it's pretty easy actually.
This is the town lake up on the right, if you were. It's in the Macaronis says on half of Dumbarton, the town lake wall. Here's the town lake wall, and there's the
Half of Drumballen by the town lake wall. Skin pale as pastry, rare summer sun. Drift from pier to pier on inner tubes stolen from Pat Fay's garage. Fingers and toes trail in icy water. Grass-stained football togs and faded underpants. McIlharney's window says knickers down, now's your chance.
We'll have summer too. We'll have summer too.
The lake full of holes will swallow you whole. I promised my mother I'd never go. But through murky green algae, I saw a watery sky. I heard voices, not mute, but distant. And later, sweets at Mrs. Fulton's. Lazy days. Lazy days. Lazy days. Festivals raged, the slow bicycle race down Main Street. Hairy legs, tiny tots, bonny babes and football in the park. And as darkness fell, we stood at the boot factory stand where he blew his fucking head off. And looked out at the lake that teems with bream and roach and the souls of those who abandoned all hope.
We'll have summer too. We'll have summer too.
To the island where mud fills your shoes and stinks to high heaven. His own shaking hand banished him forever. From consecrated land where all were laid before him. Lazy days. The first album's actually been successful beyond our wildest dreams in that we've gotten attention from all over the world, and we've been in some British magazines and that kind of stuff. And it was very odd for us because people actually take it seriously, which we never really expected. We expected this to be like some sort of demo that you'd make back in 1982, and nobody would ever hear it except you and think it's the greatest thing ever. And so this was the first time ever that we'd put something out that people actually said that this is actually really good. I would say the album very much is a set of short stories, or perhaps sort of vignettes, and they're memories. And while the songs aren't biographical, there's a biographical element to them. And I think what I learned to do in the recording of this album was to get away from that sort of linear way of writing something, and to allow something work on its own, and to assume that the listener can sort of finish pieces, so you don't have to say everything that you want.
The pop-in, it's interesting, in putting it together, it was a hodgepodge of a whole load of different ideas. This idea of having a vocal coming in and out and across itself with the refrain, and having this guitar kind of, dragging away, growling away in the background the whole time. It turned out to be a lot more melodic than we were expecting it to be in the first instance.
I had a guy walk up to me today I think he was from Wexford or something, and he said, we had the pop in our town too, but it was called something else. I can't remember what it was called. And I think everywhere you go, the pop-in exists somewhere, because the pop-in wasn't just a chip shop called the pop-in. The pop-in was a sort of a place where teenagers in their formative years would go to and begin to learn about life and begin to sort of experiment with life and that kind of thing. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to tap into sort of human emotion and how humans interact and how humans develop and how they grow and how they become self-aware, or at least we hope that they become self-aware. And I think these are universal ideals, so I don't think it's that hard to tap into that.
£24, that was the prize. The fruit machine at the pop in, where you covered your chips in sauce, red and brown. As much as you like, because it's all watered down anyway. And the twins out back peeling spuds and smoking fags. Already men and them not yet 13 years old. Big Tom on the jukebox and Brendan Shine and Gloria, one day at a time, sweet Jesus. The Rubettes and Slade, Glitter and Abba, the dancing queen. You can dance and you can jive, but you work in the boom factory all your fucking life. Bags and plates, scratched white delf on chip formica, a leg of fish and a breast of chicken without a bra. And the sauce red and brown. The portions large and greasy, like the windows from where you get a fine view of this town. Nothing ever happened in this town. Over the road, Frank McDonald, his glasses superfluous, his hands are his eyes. He gave us penny bars and major, a decent old skin, emeralds and goldflake, friendly matches, players and sweet Afton. Neil O'Brien, he sold dead men's suits from Glasgow. Picked up at Dublin's docks by Josie in a green flatbed borrowed from Frank Clark. On a journey punctuated with half-ones. In Minolty, in Kells, Navan, in Clonee. I bought indoor fireworks from gainers on the green that fizzed and died. Tired out like Auntie May, she slipped and broke hips one frosty evening, visiting a favourite nephew. Nursed to death, she died in a palindromic town. A nursing home of sorts. Please let me go quickly without idiot nephew. Life is life and we cling desperately. The end is not relief. And with no pop-in, we descended upon sisters. With neither chip nor juke, they gave us both. With Space Invaders in Japan. Teardrop explodes and chips covered in sauce, red and brown. We piloted UFOs and flying saucers. Asteroids that thrusted in hyperspace and disappeared only to reappear like specters. Space-faced and 15, I hyperspaced and disappeared, only to reappear halfway across the world. Middle-aged and lined, longing for all that used to bore me, embarrassed by all I once held dear.
To be honest, I'm feeling quite nervous about this upcoming gig in Baleabra. I, still have a huge sense of connection with Cavan, but if I'm honest, I really travel up mostly for things like funerals and things like that. I find when I go back to Baleabra, I often feel quite sad coming away.
Remember the cool guys used to have in the thatch? They used to have nights where they played Meatloaf and what do you call all the bands?
You always resented that.
I really did resent it.
They always resented it.
The album sort of begins in a very specific area about 2 miles outside of Baleabra, which is called the Vale, where stood the Foundry, which was this sort of factory that made this steel. Looking back on the album as a whole, the Vale is very much the genesis of the ideas. And then it sort of travels into the town, so you sort of has that journey going from the Vale into the town of Baleabra, and there's the Pop Inn, and there's Crossings Bar, and there's all these opportunities for mischief and that kind of thing.
Cullivans, the sisters who gave us Chip and Duke. Japan, Teardrop Explodes, right in there. Cuts and
the
grows.
hairdressing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they were always kind of had a knack for that kind of stuff. Neil O'Brien, we just passed him, Dead Men Suits.
This is the first place that we played. We had a public appearance, I suppose you might call it a gig. The guy who owned it was a fella called Paddy Clark, Paddy the banker, and very kindly he allowed us to come in and play here. It was in the afternoon because this would really be a country and western stronghold. So he allowed us to come in the afternoon, and some of our mates came along, and we clattered about for about 20 minutes or so, and at that point we were happy we'd played a gig, and I guess we crossed the line. There was no coming back then.
Well, we're about to go into the hall, the community centre. I haven't been in here, I would say, for almost 40 years, but I have a picture in my mind. Let's see if it looks the same. I don't know. It's probably changed.
It's narrower than I remember.
Okay, yeah, it's longer.
Certainly is.
This is where we would have sort of first started hearing bands and discos and that kind of stuff, and probably drinking and sneaking in naggins of vodka, and it was all a little bit wild at the time. Going back to Baleabra, it's actually quite poignant, and my parents are no longer alive, and I do remember when we were in bands years ago, and I think my father went to one of our gigs, and which was very progressive of him, but he was a little put off by it, and he thought it was just noise and it was loud and it was stuff. And I remember him telling me that we should think about writing about Baleabra and stuff, and of course I would laugh at him and go, "You're so uncool, Dad." And even though he's no longer here, I sort of feel the songs that we're writing now, he would actually love them. He would have actually really enjoyed them and would have appreciated them. And there's a sadness there, because it's I'd love for him to hear them, but I sort of think when we play Baleabra, he'll be sort of there in spirit.
So like your ancestral home is out here. This is where I lived for most of my time in Baleabra.
It's a sense that there's a part of you, a part of your journey that's been lost. So many of, the places, the shops, the characters have passed on, and they're not there anymore. Going back to Baleabra, I guess, there's a sense of responsibility. There's a worry that we might not do them justice. Equally, I guess, there's a sense that, we really talked a lot about trying to be respectful about telling the stories of the town, and I guess this gig is going to put that to the test of whether we got the pitch right.
you know what I mean. I think you know what I mean. What did you say? I didn't say nothing. What did you say? Come on here and I try to go punch. What did you say? I'm asking on a fire. I'm halfway to the war. If I wasn't so drunk, I swear I'd be dying. If the fucker walks away, he's got bigger fish to fry. Out of his head on bad Guinness and bad DNA. What can you say? What can you say? Gotta get away, gotta blow this town. Out of my standing round. Eating chips off the back of a van. At a quarter to four. For a man with my qualification, there's gotta be more. Lipstick on my collar, just piss on my shoes. This kind of shit gives a good man the blues.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls who have come long distances to be here tonight for what anybody can gather from walking into the building, the emotion, I would say, is probably palpable in terms of the reunion that it is for some of the families that are here tonight, and it's wonderful for us here in Maidarborough to have you guys doing this performance. So I'm going to stop talking and hand you over to the guys. Give them a huge bit of a round of applause.
Hello, and thank you all for coming out tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here. And when we decided to do a few concerts in Ireland, this was obviously the place that we wanted to be. And anybody who's actually heard the album Foundry Folk Songs, you'll know it's pretty much about Bailieborough. And it's about our sort of growing up in Bailieborough and the things that we got up to and the sort of town as it was. And in many ways, the sort of the town as it was in times gone by. This one's called Miss McDonough. It's a new song. We're not actually sure what it's called yet, but for now it's called Miss
Miss McDonough, she'd be spinning in the grave if only she could see you now, far beyond the prefab, not what you had in mind. Tough as the boys and none did dare to whistle or to pull upon your hair. Wild as a mountain, We were wild as Mitchell's Field, where the goat did dwell, on a new road behind a West End bar. A model school built to last, young and Lord Lisgar, Protestant and angular, mock Tudor and grey. We withdrew to the National, for our fathers were raised on tales of men who took the soup and stayed out of the workhouse, of men who took the long walk from the chapel to the church, and shame that sits on shoulders carries down through generations. Wild as the mountain, we were wild as Mitchell's Field, where the goat did dwell, on a new road behind a West End bar. A model school built for all, young and Lord Lisgar, Protestant and angular, mock Tudor and grey. Steeped in civil war, blue shirts, black and tans, tragedy and fratricide, glorious defeat our stock and trade. Boys who kicked footballs, that's how our gods were made. Did we really believe, as we threw pennies in the plate to feed soft curates from far-flung townlands, did we really believe, did we really believe, did we really believe? Miss McDonough, she'd be spinning in the grave if only she could see you now, beaten and bloodied and lifeless on the floor.
When I was a child, I remember we had a book called the AA Road Book, and it was a big, thick book, and it had a little blurb about every town in Ireland, and I looked at it, and Ballyboro's claim to fame was, I think, was a busy market town that had a nice window from Harry Clark in the church, and so I wrote this song about it years later, and then I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, there's no Harry Clark window in Ballyboro. So I hope I'm right, but if I'm wrong, we'll change the name. We'll find a town where there is a Harry Clark window. We'll be the Sons of Northern Munster or something. Harry Clark.
Over the burnt out shell of Bailey's domain. We whiled away days, smoking fags, spinning yarns, the truth stretched so far. It formed a perfect snare.
What was remarkable to me about playing in Ballyboro last night, we had a very varied audience. We had children and we had people middle-aged, like myself, and we had people in their 80s and their 90s. And they were listening to this very subversive material, but in a very genteel way. And they listened respectfully and they sat and they clapped. And it sort of struck me that earlier in my life, when I used to play about in bands earlier, when we sort of wanted to be punk rockers and stuff, and we'd be way more over the top and outlandish and looking for attention. The stuff wasn't nearly as subversive.
I think the Ballyboro gig
probably couldn't have gone better, really. The guys in the Anglo-Celt nailed it, I think, when they said it was a community who were really comfortable in their skin. It's been a very revealing, but I guess mostly a positive experience in terms of understanding, you know, our identity and how it was shaped by growing up in Cavan in those days.
I was a little bit worried when we were playing Bailey. We were very, very nervous, and as soon as we started and I looked around that room, I just knew that this was going to work, it was going to go well.
Their way through the streets of this planter's town, this planter's province, this planter's town. Out past Sheridan's, they will lay me down, they will lay me down, they will lay me down. This planter's town, this planter's province, this planter's town. Out past Sheridan's, they will lay me down, they will lay me down, they will lay me down.
I probably would not talk about Ireland that much to my children. It really wouldn't be something that would come up. But since we started writing songs for this album, something has rubbed off, and they're really enjoying their time here. I think it's very good. It's good to reconnect with your past, and I think a lot of people don't really have that opportunity, or they fail to grasp that opportunity sometimes. And I feel fortunate that I've been able to do that.
I mean, I suppose there are some disappointments about the gig. The principal one for me, of course, is that neither of my parents were able to go. My father has passed on now, and you know, it's a real pity because this whole project would have been something that he would have loved. You know, as a Tipperary man coming to Cavan, he loved the divilment. But so many people asked for him and my mother while we were there. It was kind of sad that he wasn't there to see this, and I'm glad for Noel and Paddy that their parents were able to attend. But I mean, I guess for myself and Justin, we didn't have that opportunity. But yeah, at least we got to do this.
Steady drizzle on a half-day Wednesday. Hardly a sinner up the town, and a cold, cold wind blows down. From the mountain, from rock and lane. I took a walk down by the school. Boys in Wellington boots and ragged striped jumpers, filled to the brim with glee and mischief, belting out with abandon, without inhibition, to a world as yet unexplored. We are the boys of Wexford. Yet to fully understand the complexity of joy, of sadness, of loss, and of distance.